It's tabletop time. I'm Dave.
And I'm Jen.
And today we are going to be playing with boats. That's right, we're getting nautical out there. So we filmed a bit of a video probably 6 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago that we thought was going to turn into something else. But recently we've been doing our Age of Sigmar narrative campaign thanks to the support of the patrons, and we actually thought it would be really cool to take you on the journey of how we've incorporated boats into our games of Age of Sigmar and what that looks like. And also we're going to be building Jazza a Mudlads boat from scratch. Sort of. So at my hobby store, I created my own homebrew narrative game called Age of Sigmar Explorers of the Realm Seas. It's a fan supplement that allows you to use boats and skirmish-sized miniature games in games of Age of Sigmar. It's kind of like Age of Sigmar Skirmish meets, I don't know, Dreadfleet on a small scale. I've been having a lot of fun with it when we could in between lockdowns. One of the key features of this is every faction has to make a boat. And my boat is for the Lumineth Realm Lords. So needing a boat, I had to find a good basis for it. And thankfully, I found a TT combat kit called the Elven Docks that had a very nice Elven riverboat that would be quite suitable for my Lumineth Realm Lords. I built and painted the kit pretty much as the instructions intended, gluing together lots of MDF and getting it ship shape and ready for games. But that wasn't enough. So what I wanted to do when I brought it into the studio is to upgrade it, make it feel a little bit more at home in the world of Age of Sigmar and a little bit more tied to the Lumineth Realm Lords more so than just Tolkien elves. To do this, I went to our local hardware store and got some wire mesh that I could cut into strips and use as a proxy for some ship rigging. The taut rigging that people climb up the main masts. I also used tiny 3-braid rope from a hobby collection to make more rigging, tying the masts together as well as the sails to the mast. This was a fiddly process. Tying all those small knots together was quite difficult. However, it was totally worth it. It ended up being quite satisfying, and looking at the finished product made all that effort worthwhile. Another thing I did is I got some little beading rocks from a craft store, ones that might be used for jewelry, necklaces, or bracelets. These looked appropriate for Lumineth sigil stones or magic elemental runes, so I strung them up, tying them up with the same string, and laid them alongside the edges of the boat. To finish up and tie it nicely with my Lumineth paint scheme, I made sure to go in and paint those elements using technical paints over the rope. I find using brown dirt technical paints like Sterling Mud on the black string actually makes it look like chunky, dirty rope that's worn and used at sea. And painting those small beading rocks white and then putting on the freehand purple elemental symbols really makes this ship feel at home with the Lumineth Realm Lords.
My boat was kind of Viking inspired, and I wanted a special little place that really represented the Daughters of Cain. They're this awesome faction of all predominantly women that in scantily clad outfits, but they're out for blood and they're just totally awesome, and I'm totally all about them. So for my boat, it consisted of two different types, or two different models I should say. One was an MDF boat that we purchased online that was really easy to make. I was really happy with the final product. The other half, however, was part of a Games Workshop model called a Cauldron of Blood, and we butchered it completely and put it on the back of this boat. And I think it just looks so cool. It was really interesting to take two different concepts and put them together, and it just worked so well. My favorite part of this model is definitely the staircase that we added on, and the little aisle where she sits up is so cool. There's a beautiful mirror behind her, and I wanted to paint a captured soul behind it, so I think that just looks really awesome. And for a final touch for the Daughters of Cain, I wanted to add a symbol onto the front of their banner so you really knew that they were coming and they were out for blood.
So by the this stage, you're probably a little bit interested in Explorers of the Realm Seas. Well, it's a personal thing I made for my own local store and not quite brushed up for public consumption. However, through the amazing support of our Patreons and with their continued support, we are going to be able to do more things like that, flesh it out and release it on our Patreon. So if you want to see Jazza and I play games on the high sea in a custom narrative game that I wrote myself, consider jumping onto our mini club and joining in. We're going to be posting 4 times a month going forward, and our mini Discord will only be getting more active as we share our whips. So come along, join the fun, and help shape the journey that we take our models on. And thank you once again for all of those who've helped us out, getting us to the place where we can actually start to do these crazy cool projects.
So with all that said and done and our boats finally completed, we decided that I think it's time for Jazza to have a boat of his own. And what better army than the Mud Lads, and this boat looks sick.
Yeah, I've been secretly printing it out on the 3D printer at the studio, and it's looking pretty sweet, except it's covered in thick supports. I haven't had any time to play with the settings, and it's only my second time ever printing on an FDM printer, and at the studio it's just like, we gotta sneak this one in. So this is gonna be, well, let's just say difficult.
Oh my god. What? So this is why you don't want supports on files that are FDM prints.
How you going, Jen?
Is not liable for any damages unto oneself caused by oneself.
We're getting there.
I'm pretty sure that's not how work-safe liability works. Oh, it's nice when a piece actually comes off. All right, so these supports were definitely too thick and definitely too well adhered to the model. I will say this Orc ship is a really cool free model that you can download, which I thought was super neat. So I'm definitely gonna have no complaints about the model itself because, well, I mean, they're generous enough to offer it for free and it's really cool. However, pulling it off the supports was not really cool. It was horrible, it was awful. I cut myself 3 times and I have a blister on my hand from tearing all that crap off. I'm glad it's an Orc ship because where it stays rough, it's staying rough, and we're just gonna put some weathering on it.
I 100% agree with Dave. This was not the funnest part of the project, but that all being said, pulling off those little pieces and revealing what was underneath was very satisfying. I also have a few battle scars as well to share, but in the end, I think this is gonna be really cool. I think it's also worth the effort because there's so much design and texture based on this boat that, well, half the work's kind of done for us. So hopefully it's gonna be a really cool project.
So we actually printed this at 70% scale. Now the reason for that is my homebrew game has rules that say ignoring rams and other add-ons, your ship can be no longer than 30 centimeters and no wider than 20. And this STL was much bigger than that. So I shrunk it down so from bow to stern it roughly hit 30 centimeters, but the ram on the front does extend beyond that. Which means the cool as anything D&D tiles that are kind of carved into the paneling so you can play with it in D&D will not be very useful for our games. So with the model off the supports, I took to using a Dremel to attempt to clean some of the areas up a little bit better. But I ran into a new issue. The Dremel spun so fast that it just melted the plastic, so I was back to clippers for the final cleanup. Because we had scaled down the boat to 70% of its actual size, the lower deck wouldn't be used as a playable area. So I knew I could slam in some hot glue to glue the bottom deck together and then mill apart the gaps to make it look more seamless. The guiding tabs were a real help when assembling this boat. I found it was very easy to place the parts in the appropriate areas thanks to the little nubs and the holes that have been left out of the model. Clever design and used so that you could make this for D&D and have multiple decks playable. What have you got there, Jen?
Why, it's Jazz's lovely boat.
Awesome. All right, so we've got the Mud Lads boat. It's all printed, and today we're going to be basically diving in and slapping paint and things and glue and shields. So let's just have some fun. This is gonna be fun, Mud Lad style. Wah! With the boat assembled, it was time to spray it. And recently I've been on a kick of using these multiple sprays to get in a bit of a zenithal in different colors, but this time I added a bit of complexity. I sprayed from underneath a deep green gray tone. I wanted this boat to look like it often sat in silty, muddy water or had lots of algae and growth coming onto it. So with these 3 sprays on top of a black prime, I was really happy with the effect of the wood. I think it came together pretty well and most of the the work was done. Knowing that we would be coming back at it with streaking grime because, well, these are mud lads and that's part of the army, I was pretty confident we wouldn't need to do any more work on this wood.
After Dave spread the boats, it was time to put the masts into the boat. They were a bit fiddly to put in. They were actually a bit thicker than the holes, so we had to size them down a bit. This required more carving, which I wasn't particularly looking forward to, but after a bit of push and shove, they did go in with a bit of ease, which was awesome. In the end, we found that carving them was a lot of work and quite stressful on our hands, so Dave decided to just crush the pieces. They're actually hollow in the middle, so this was way easier than trying to carve them apart.
It was cathartic. After all of the damage that had been done to my hands by this 3D print, getting some pliers out and just getting revenge was, well, it was entertaining and practical. It worked really well. I made sure not to be overzealous, just squeezing them a few times with the pliers to break it up a little bit and allow the very bottom of those masts to be pressed into the gap. And once we'd started pushing them down and adding some super glue, it was really easy to get them in.
It was time to add some detail to the boat, so I went around and painted silver on all of the spiky bits of the boat, and including the silver trim around the side. I added small silver details to the bottom of the masts, the door, and the little hinge in the middle of the boat.
And while Jen was base coating the core of the boat, I got to work on the crow's nest, effectively doing the same thing. 2 coats of iron on the metal parts. Now, it took Jen a lot longer to paint all the metal parts around the hull of the boat than it did for me to do the crow's nest. So when I finished up the base coat on the crow's nest, I moved in and started to paint all of the shields. These shields I'd cast with milliput, UV resin, plaster, and a whole bunch of different methods using some blue stuff. Now, if you want to check out more about how I did this, I've actually got a whole video on using blue stuff and my first time experimenting with it. And these are the results. They're not perfect, but for scenery and for duplicating a part in limited supplies, I think they work really well. And I'm excited to see them on the boat because I reckon they're going to pull this from being an orc boat into a mudlads boat. On top of a few coats of red, I dry brushed on dwarf skin orange, which was the highlight color for the shields. The last touch was Jazz's mudlads have a whole bunch of a golden tinny metal on them. So I painted down a metallic color on the teeth and some of the details like the studs. Knowing that streaking grime would do the rest of the work, I was happy to glue these onto the model. Taking some time and liberal application of super glue, I applied the shields along the side of the boat, Viking style. I made sure to put them slightly off kilter and not perfectly aligned. I felt that was the orky thing to do. At this stage, it was time to glue our test fitted and crushed masts into the model for the final time. And for the first time, we got to lean back and see the boat as it would look. And at this stage, I was feeling pretty good about it. I knew streaking grime would add a lot of that dirty, aged wood effect to it. So looking at the boat, it was almost ready. And there was this weird flocky moss that Jazza has mentioned he hasn't found much use for. It's strung together almost on a mesh of hair, and I've also found it difficult to use. But this was the perfect application. I put on some gloves and went crazy with the super glue and just stuck this stuff all over the lower hull. I like to think that it's either a growth of moss on an overly moist and untreated boat, or it's some kind of swamp weed that just drags along and clings to the sides of this mudlads boat. The time had come for streaking grime. So this is probably my second or third time putting together and using an airbrush, so I was a little bit nervous to do it. But Jazza gave me all the stuff I needed to get going, absolutely pelting this model with streaking grime. I mean, that's the mudlads way, right? After coating the whole thing in streaking grime, I used white spirits to pull it back a little bit on the shields and on the upper areas of the metallic. Also on several areas of the deck just to give it a bit more depth and texture. I made sure to go in extra strong with the streaking grime around the inside corners of the boat. It really makes it look like footfalls, mud, and a lot of weathering has affected the timber on the surface of the deck, and I think brought it to life in an interesting way. After the streaking grime was done, the final steps had to happen, and they were all done with sponges. Just sponging on a little bit of a rough highlight gold on those little small details on the shields, and then sponging in a rough silver highlight on the metallic areas, as well as a bright orange to simulate rust. And that's it. The boat is done. I'm really happy with it. But there's one thing that we need to do before we can say that we've signed off on that project, and that is to show Jazza. All right, so as promised, it is time to reveal to Jazza his mudlads boat. Yay!
Okay, I'm so excited.
All right.
I'm so excited.
Jen, do you want to do the honors?
Okay.
And reveal the boat?
All right.
His hands are waiting. He's waiting to be past the boat.
Oh my god, I got a boot! Oh my god, you guys.
Oh, you brought mother.
It's just, it's a little bit grotty.
It's a little bit dirty for
I'm
you.
sorry, no, I meant because grots.
Oh my god.
I love it so much. I love this. How good do the shields look?
Yeah, I know, right?
They really bring it to be mud laddie, and I love it from the front just because of the design of the boat.
Yeah.
Really big.
Sick is that? You realise what this means?
Welcome to the realm seas.
I think we're gonna have to run an ocean battle report at some point. You guys are amazing. I'd clap, but I have one hand. So
That's the sound of one hand clapping. Thank you to all our patrons for
Thank
all your
you.
support. And
where does it go?
Where's what?
I fill in the whole-
scroll.
yeah.
That's all right. Just it'll move
I
interchangeably.
think this is how will it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love this because so
Or
far,
Billy picks a favourite.
every time I do my editor's notes, they surprise me by doing something completely the opposite. So what do we get? Who knows?
It's always a mystery, but it's always fun. Just like our content here on Tabletop Time. And hey, thank you for joining us here today, Jen. I feel like, can we share the exciting news?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jen is here every week now because of your Patreon support. It's made that possible. Dave is here every week. Everyone is here and the party is just getting started. Thank you so much for making this possible. And thank you guys for making me a boat.
It's the first of many.
You're making me another boat?
Sure, why not?
Just kidding.